Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Simon Mundy. I'm a journalist with the Financial Times, editor of the Moral Money platform, which explores environmental, social issues around business and finance. So it's really a pleasure for me to be emceeing this session because it's squarely in the area of what we're covered on in my team. And I'm sure I'll get a lot of interesting ideas and insights from this session. It's become a cliche to say that the response to climate change requires a whole of society approach, that it's going to require serious input from both the private sector and from governments. But the details of how that is going to work are very complicated. And that's a key area of focus for us in my team and in the wider FT. And I would argue that these sorts of sessions in which business representatives and government representatives can speak with each other, hear from each other, share ideas, talk about challenges and opportunities, this can be really constructive in terms of moving towards best practice and serious progress on this front. Caring for Climate, of course, has been a really important forum for this kind of engagement, set up in 2007. And it's become a real fixture at these COP conferences since then. And this gathering will feature an especially strong presence from governments. And so will really be aimed at pushing forward that dialogue that's so important. Just a reminder, this is not being live streamed, but a recording will be made available on YouTube after the event. So this is your opportunity to be famous if you say anything especially interesting or valuable. And we're going to try and make this a really free-flowing discussion so everyone can share as much as possible of the great ideas that I'm sure are here in this room. So we'll crack straight on. I'd like to hand it over to Sanda Ojambo, who is the Assistant Secretary General of the UN and also Executive Director and CEO of the UN Global Compact, for some opening remarks. Over to you, Sanda.
Thank you, Simon, and good afternoon, dear excellencies, business leaders, and distinguished guests who are with us today. It's my real pleasure to welcome you to this Caring for Climate discussion. On the onset, I'd like to thank our partners, the UNFCCC, UN Environment Programme, UNEP next to me, for your continued commitment to this Caring for Climate initiative. And to all of you in the room, thank you so much for making your time first to be here for COP29 and certainly your time to join us in this discussion. Your voices are so important. As the climate crisis continues to accelerate, we know that the next round of nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, are more critical than ever. How do we know this? Because no matter where you are, we are already experiencing climate catastrophes. In the recent times, from crippling droughts and nature loss to monster storms, the melting of the ice caps, recent deadly floods in Spain, Typhoon Yagi in Southeast Asia, and multiple hurricanes in the Caribbean and the United States, they're all top of our minds. And according to the World Economic Forum 2024 risk report, the top 3 risks over the next decade are linked to the climate crisis. So back to the nationally determined contributions, or the NDCs. For them to be effective, they must not only be ambitious because we're dealing with real crisis, but they also must be investable. They must be inclusive, science-based, and aligned with national development priorities, attracting funding from both the public and the private sectors. In fact, if done right, these nationally determined contributions can double up as investment roadmaps, spurring economic growth and turbocharging the Sustainable Development Goals. Of course, achieving these goals will require 2 things. First and foremost, innovative public-private partnerships, as well as broad collaboration across sectors. This includes enabling policies and frameworks that will facilitate and incentivize sustainable business and sustainable investment. One of the key outcomes from COP28, you may recall, was the agreement to triple renewable power and double energy efficiency by 2030. Corporate action is critical to these goals, and investments in renewables are on the rise, reaching an estimated $366 billion in 2021. And for the first time last year, investments in renewables were larger than investments in fossil fuel. However, this is still far from the annual goal of $4.5 trillion that is needed. Business leaders that we've talked to, including some in this room, are calling for more public-private partnerships and more engagement from governments on sustainable business and sustainability targets. Business leaders are overwhelmingly calling for increased public-private dialogue and partnership. And to my second point, we need plans that address the entire impact of corporate activity, including supply chains. At the UN Global Compact, we know that more than 70% of a large company's greenhouse gas emissions and 2/3 of its ESG footprint lies in its supply chains. Policies must support sustainable practices through value chains, reducing Scope 3 emissions and channeling investment to where it is needed the most. So, my dear friends gathered here today, the success of the 2025 NDCs and indeed of the 2030 Agenda depends on our commitment to break down policy barriers and create favorable conditions for private sector action and finance. Towards these goals, the UN Global Compact is working with key partners and member states to ensure greater private sector inclusion in the NDC processes, both in design and in implementation. As we all know and we've heard, the clock is ticking. And I look forward to working together with you across sectors to determine concrete steps towards our shared goals. Thank you for attending. Looking forward to a vibrant discussion. And I'll hand back over to you, Simon, moderator. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sander, for those terrific opening remarks. I'd like to hand over to a representative of another of the founding partners of this Caring for Climate initiative. Ruth Sogman de Couto is the Deputy Director of Climate Change from UNEP, which, as I mentioned, is one of the founding partners of this initiative. Over to you, Ruth.
Thank you very much. On behalf of UNEP and on behalf of our Executive Director, Inger Andersen, we thank you very much, UN Global Compact, and of course UNFCCC for the invitation. We're very pleased to be here. As my father always tells me, that education is by repetition, and a lot of the messages that I will convey are repetitive messages, but are very important because we in the UN have a kind of a copy sheet that we have common messages on NDC, so please bear with me. A couple of weeks ago, UNEP released the 2024 edition of the Emissions Gap Report. The overarching conclusion is that we are vastly off track, of course, to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. As things stand, the current NDCs, the nationally determined contributions that you vastly talked about, if fully implemented, will still put the world on a track for a global temperature rise between 2.6 to 2.8 still in this century. The report also tells us that even the policies currently in place are insufficient to meet these NDCs. If nothing changes, we're heading for a temperature rise of 3.1 degrees, and we can all imagine the impacts that this could have. And I think Sander really illustrated some of the examples that we're already witnessing. The new NDCs are due by early next year, and we must collectively cut 42% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 relative to the 2019 levels to get on a credible path to keep the 1.5 alive. Looking into 2035, emissions must fall even more to 57%. This means that on an annual basis, we need every year to shave 7.5% of global emissions until 2035. And this figure will grow the more we are enact on a yearly basis. So this is just as we stand today. This is a very heavy task that requires global and national mobilization of all actors on a scale and pace never seen before. But it does, for the moment, remain technically possible. So we shouldn't give it up on 1.5 yet. National governments, together with subnationals and businesses, can deliver the cuts needed by investing heavily in solar and wind, in forests, in focusing on energy efficiency, in building, schooling, transport, and industry, and all backed by a whole of government approach, a new global financial architecture, and strong private sector action. The G20, responsible for 77% of global emissions, need to do the heavy lifting. There is also some good news that I think, Sander, you talked about, of the investment of renewable energy on the rise. And yesterday in the IEA high-level dialogue between COP29 and IEA on energy, IEA told us that we're very much on track to meet the tripling of renewable energy by 2030. The pledge that was set at the global stocktake in the United Arab Emirates consensus. But what we need now, and this was a lot discussed, is that the grids and storage come together with this massive increase of renewables, and we're not yet there to fully achieve the benefits. And of course, cut methane emissions by 30% by 2030, extremely important, which largely come from oil and gas companies that are emitting methane. Now, going back to the NDCs, UNEP has been actively supporting NDC development and implementation, even before the Paris Agreement. We're now in the third round of the NDCs, but the first round was before the Paris. It was called INDCs. I don't know if you remember that. And we have been working with countries, and this has been an iterative process. And I think now the multi-stakeholder engagement and acceptance by civil society became a very critical factor of the NDCs. This is not done, of course, in isolation. This is a UN-coordinated effort led by UNDP's Climate Promise, the Secretariat Climate Action Team, the UNFCCC Secretariat, and implemented through national UN offices in close collaboration with the NDC Partnership that is here. We have done many forums in the last 2-3 months to support actually countries in all regions to come and discuss together with the civil society, what are the challenges and the needs and that countries are encountering in elaborating their NDCs. I fully agree with what Sanda says, and that's what we hear all the time, is that we need the NDCs to be financed. But if they are to double as investment plans, NDCs have to be fully embedded into national development strategies, translated into legal and policy frameworks, and then they can give the non-state actors actually the policy coherence and the confidence to make long-term investments that are so desperately needed to achieve the NDC goals, both in developing, in emerging economies and developed countries. At the same time, non-state actors can play a key role in enhancing the ambition and accelerating action and leading by example. We also found out that transparency is also very important, in line with the recommendations from the Secretary General High-Level Expert Group on Net Zero emission commitments from non-state entities. UNEP is working on strengthening transparency and the integration of actions by non-state actors into national NDCs. Based on a number of case studies and a recent report on strengthening transparency of non-state actors, we have learned that harmonized monitoring, reporting, and verification and climate data are key, especially in developing countries where improving data collection and reporting can still today be enhanced through the use of digital technologies. And of course, and I fully agree, there is a need for a much broader dialogue between state and non-state actors especially to better understand how to support Scope 3 emissions and supply chains. This is, I think, what I hear back that a lot of companies are very much struggling with and not necessarily reporting with data, but with the emissions factors, because this is something that everybody's grappling with. UNEP is fully engaged in supporting countries on NDCs. Increased ambition is absolutely needed by everybody, all hands on deck, all state and non-state actors. However, ambition only matters if plans are implemented and emissions are actually reduced. So thank you very much, and UNEP stand ready for continuous collaboration. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ruth. We're shortly going to start the open discussion section of this session, so I hope everyone's getting warmed up with plenty to say. Before we go into that open discussion, when of course we'll be talking about how governments and the private sector can work together towards achieving more ambitious action on climate change at the national and international level. Before we jump into that, I'd like to invite Pablo Vieira, who is the Global Director of the NDC Partnership Support Unit, which is one of the UN Global Compact's key partners in increasing private sector engagement in this process. I'd like to invite Pablo to say a few words to set the scene for this discussion. Over to you, Pablo.
Thank you very much, Simon, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pablo Vieira. I'm the Global Director of the NDC Partnership. I want to start by thanking our close partners at the UN Global Compact and, of course, UNDP and UNFCCC as co-organizers of this very important event. It is wonderful also to see in this room many of our members and partners from both the private and public sector. The NDC Partnership, for those who don't know us, is a global coalition that brings together over 230 members, including developed and developing countries and international institutions, to support strong climate action in developing countries and drive sustainable development. Through our model, governments identify their NDC implementation priorities and the type of support needed to translate them into actionable policies and programs. And based on these requests, the membership, our more than 230 members, come together and put together a package of support in terms of expertise, technical assistance, and funding to advance the needs of the developing countries. This collaborative response provides developing countries with efficient access to a wide range of resources to adapt to and mitigate climate change and foster a more equitable and sustainable development. The topic today is crucial. And as it has been said, it's very important, especially as we discuss the next round of NDCs due next year. Strong engagement and coordinated approaches between the public and private sectors are essential to mobilize climate finance at speed and scale. We recently co-hosted a high-level roundtable with the UN Global Compact on private sector engagement on NDCs 3.0, where countries, partners, and private sectors underscored the importance of early, structured, and continuous engagement of private sector in NDC processes, from the development of the NDC all the way to its implementation. These stakeholders agreed that such engagement informs country-led upstream processes and enhances investability of NDCs through clear sectoral pathways, policy levers, investment planning, financing strategies, enabling environments, and capacity building to drive investments and reduce bottlenecks downstream. To support the engagement of the private sector at the global level, but also at the country level, in particular engagements, in NDC-related processes, the NDC Partnership has consulted with private sector to inform the development of tools that support countries advance their climate goals. One example is the role that the private sector played in the development of the NDC 3.0 Navigator, a tool that was designed with UNDP, with UNEP, with UNFCCC, and more than 30 partners to support countries find levels of ambition to be included in their new NDCs based on their local context. The consultation with the private sector provided critical input so that the Navigator guides countries in terms of the investability and implementability of their NDCs and how to best leverage private sector in the process of developing and implementing those NDCs. Another example is our climate investment planning and mobilization framework, which we developed with the GCF, where we conducted consultations with over 100 private sector stakeholders to collect input on the role of the private sector in investment planning for NDCs. And we're now, during this COP, launching a revised version based on the input from the private sector, and hopefully developing countries will be more effective in mobilizing private finance through developing strong investment plans. Finance-related requests are the most frequent areas of support received by the NDC Partnership. And we are providing direct support to almost 100 developing countries so that they can better mobilize finance, including by leveraging the private sector. For example, we organize at country request sectoral or programmatic roundtables with stakeholders, including private sector, such as local networks of the UN Global Compact, which represent domestic and international business, to have conversations with the government officials, understanding what are the challenges that the private sector faces, and for the government to tell what they expect from the private sector engagement in NDC implementation. We also engage with blended finance platforms, which are supported by our developed country members and our partners, sharing information about countries' NDC priorities and the projects that they have submitted in terms of requests to the partnership. To support this, we have also made our knowledge management system, which contains all the more than 6,000 requests that we have received from our members, publicly available so that everyone can consult the needs of countries and the type of projects that they need to finance. Efforts like this help align and interlink the private sector and partners' plans with countries' NDC processes to foster a more coordinated action. But a lot more is needed. This is why these conversations are so important. I look forward to the outcomes of this discussion and our continued engagement with all of you to step up our collective support for stronger climate action. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pablo. We've just been joined by Selwyn Hart, who's come with perfect timing. Selwyn is the Assistant Secretary General at the UN, Special Advisor to the Secretary General on climate action and the just transition. It's wonderful to see you, Selwyn. Would you like a moment to catch your breath before delivering your remarks?
Sure.
Or are you good to go?
I'm definitely good to go, but I don't mind listening and hearing a few of the interventions. And I came in at the tail end of my friend Pablo's intervention, so I guess the conversation was around the NDCs. And we're really at a critical moment in our collective fight against the climate crisis. All of you, and first, let me apologize first for the absence of the Secretary General who wanted to be here, but as you can imagine, it is an extremely difficult and challenging period, and with lots of overlapping meetings. But I also want to acknowledge the leadership of my colleague and friend Sanda, and all of the friends and colleagues at the Global Compact for the important work that they're doing, including convening impressive groups like this. And we will need this type of cooperation and collaboration moving forward. And we need to strengthen and definitely broaden it over the course of the coming months and years. The reality is that we're seeing climate disasters all over the world, and none of your countries and none of the continents or regions that you're from have been spared. And this is disrupting supply chains and creating financial instability. And I'll be blunt with you, it's going to get worse before it gets better anytime soon. The reality is that we're failing to limit the increase in global average temperature to 1.5, and it's just not a number. It is a limit, as the Secretary General has said, a limit to prevent the worst impacts of the climate crisis. And it requires a massive global effort if we are to get on track. UNEP's emissions gap report recently indicated that we will need to cut global emissions by 9% annually over the course of the remainder of this decade if we are to stand a fighting chance of keeping this 1.5 degree goal within reach. 9% annual emissions globally, year to year over the course of the coming years. And we know last year global emissions grew by 1%. So we've not even yet started the extremely difficult job of reducing emissions, and they need to fall on average by 9% a year. So we have a massive, massive global challenge, and no one country, no one region, no one business, no one industry can solve this challenge acting alone. It requires a massive scaling up of international cooperation, and it requires a massive scaling up of support. But there's some good news, right? We have the technologies to get us there, and finance is really not a problem. It's just that the finance is not going to the places and to the activities that that need it most. And we have seen a lot of positives on the energy transition. In 2016, and 2016 is a really important, or it was a really important year, 1 year after the finalization of the Paris Agreement, and 1 year and and that year coincided with a major political shift in one of the major economies. And in 2016, 180 gigawatts of clean energy was installed globally, and 700,000 electric vehicles were sold. Last year, over 500 gigawatts of clean energy were installed, and the IEA estimates that we're on target to install over 650 gigawatts of clean power this year. And last year, close to 14 million electric vehicles were sold. So we're seeing this rapid acceleration of the energy transition. The challenges that I think that we face, and this is where we will need your help. It's not happening fast enough. We're not displacing fossil fuels fast enough. And the reality is that it's not been a fair transition. When you look at where the transition is accelerating, since the Paris Agreement, 4 out of every $5 invested in clean power has been in China and the advanced economies. So countries representing 2/3 of global population have just attracted 1 out of every $5 invested in clean power. When you look at the level of investments in renewables, in developing and emerging economies outside of China, and I'm not China bashing by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just outlining the facts, because China has done a really amazing job in bringing down the cost globally of many of the renewable energy technologies. But the levels of investment in 2/3 of global population are stuck at the same levels as they were since the Paris Agreement was finalized 9 years ago. So we have these two challenges. We need to accelerate the pace of the transition, and we need to ensure that the transition is fair and just, and that it is truly a global transition rather than a tale of two transitions, one in the advanced economies in China and one in the rest of the world. And this is why this COP is such an important COP. We need a finance goal that helps us on the acceleration front and on the fairness and equity front. We know what the challenges are for developing and emerging economies, and it's a very diverse group of countries, by the way. But the main challenges are the cost of capital. The main challenge is the cost of capital, right? And how can we collectively, working as a system, help these countries to mobilize the levels of finance that they need to accelerate the pace of the transition? And you have different countries in different situations. You have the larger emerging economies where there's a very clear market case where the investment proposition is easy, much easier and clear. And these countries might need to focus on domestic policy and regulatory reforms. You have countries in Africa, yes, a very diverse group of countries, but where they will need, significant amounts of concessional and grant finance to help lower the cost of capital. So, but we need, really, this must be a global priority. This must be your priority. It must be all of our, it is definitely in our interest to ensure that we can help countries mobilize finance at pace and scale, and we can get the technologies for them. And it is also in your interest to help clean up your supply chains as well, because most of your supply chains are in the developing and the emerging economies. And I know that I've exceeded my time, but I just want to make this final point about the NDCs, right? So we have this challenge, we have this massive opportunity, and this COP needs to have an ambitious finance goal that helps us to mobilize the trillions that these countries need. And we have got some good news from the MDBs yesterday in terms of what they intend to do to 2030. So we assume all of that happens, and we need to push it. And this is why the NDCs are such an important part of this puzzle. All countries committed last year in Dubai to prepare 1.5 aligned economy-wide, nationally determined contributions. And we try not to call them nationally determined contributions because no one understands what that means in the real world, certainly not in the business world. You guys are, these governments, what the hell is a nationally determined contribution? So from here on in, we'll call them national climate plans, right? And all countries committed to prepare these national climate plans. And these climate plans represent the clear signal that governments can send on how they intend to contribute to the global effort on climate, how they intend to contribute to meeting and achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. They agreed 1.5 aligned, so the ambition level and the quality and coverage. And they also agreed on a set of goals related to the energy transition last year, tripling of renewables, doubling of energy efficiency, and transitioning away from fossil fuels. So we're hoping that countries take this assignment extremely seriously and prepare NDCs that are ambitious, high quality, and robust. And this is where Pablo and the NDC partnership. We're also very focused on the NDCs from the G20. The NDCs from the G20 will largely tell us how far or how close we are from meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement. And when we're looking closely at how we can support this group politically and otherwise, really to ramp up ambition. You operate in all of these countries, right? Your networks are within these countries. We need you to be a voice and champion for high ambition, high quality NDCs from all countries, but especially from these countries. We need NDCs that have ambitious targets, but also detail the policies and regulations that countries intend to take to provide these targets with the credibility, certainty, and predictability that you need. We need you to be advocates for strong domestic policies like carbon pricing, fossil fuel subsidy reform, the types of policies that provide clarity on the direction of trade. So absolutely, finally, thank you so much for inviting me here. We have a really difficult, but I see historic opportunity really to place the world on track, but it requires action, one community at a time, one country at a time, but you guys are operating underground. You know these countries, you know these communities, you know the political players in countries, and we need your help more than ever so that when we arrive next year at the COP, we can have a set of NDCs. And when we look at the total sum of these NDCs, they can provide us with some hope that we are on track to meeting our collective goals. So I thank you so much, and apologies for being so long-winded, but you guys are such an important group and such an important piece of the puzzle to help us solve the climate crisis.
Thank you so much, Selwyn, for those really powerful remarks to tee up this discussion stage of the session. Powerful for several reasons. For one thing, you underscored the urgency of the situation that we face. As I've seen for myself through my reporting, people are already losing their lives and livelihoods in large numbers all over the world. We are not getting anything like the levels of finance needed to address these problems, particularly in the developing countries where most of us human beings live. We are not on track to address this problem, as you so powerfully identified. At the same time, you also emphasized how much opportunity there is for us as a global civilization to do so much better than we are doing. And that's obviously going to be the focus of this discussion. One request, if I may, I think, as Selwyn said, we're not on track. Whatever we're doing as humanity at the moment, it's not good enough. And that suggests that none of us are doing a good enough job. It suggests that governments are not doing a good enough job of driving action. Companies are not doing a good enough job on their part. We in the media presumably are not doing a good enough job of writing about and talking about these issues. We all need to do better. So I think what would be really valuable in this discussion is if everyone can explore the ways in which they think they might be able to do better and the ways in which they could be supported in this by other players in the global economy. For example, if you're a company, it would be really helpful to hear how changes in government policy might enable you to go further and faster. From governments, this is your opportunity to tell business leaders how they could contribute towards you and other governments meeting your national climate plans, as Selwyn was just talking about. So let's get stuck in. A few housekeeping remarks just to kick off. As we all famously know, brevity is the soul of wit. I've been asked to keep all interventions to 2 minutes and to interrupt if people go over that, but I hate doing that, so please don't make me. And if we can keep those interventions to 2 minutes each, then we can really make the most of this opportunity to hear from everyone in the room. And please do respond to what you hear from other people. This is meant to be a discussion, an interactive discussion when people can really engage with each other. So if you want to talk, please just do this. Just put your card on its end, and I'll know to call on you. So please do that if you'd like to intervene. Yes, there's number 17 there. Yeah, thank you. Government of Madagascar. Thank you.
Well, 2 minutes, challenge accepted. Thank you. And thank you for the invitation. Well, just to give you a brief context, yesterday, 4 countries created the new coalition of the G0, and Mr. Selvin Hart was there also as a special advisor to the UN SG. So Madagascar is part of these 4 countries that sequester more carbon than we emit. But still, that doesn't prevent us to make a lot of efforts and to target a third NDC that will be ambitious, but mostly that will be achievable. It needs to be realist, and it will need also to be aligned with our long-term strategy. This third NDC, we really want it to be a top-of-the-class, children-sensitive, WASH-sensitive, and with a pool of projects, of bankable projects, with a portfolio of projects. I'd like to take this opportunity of talking also with the private sector, saying that in our second NDC, on the 10-year plan, Madagascar needed between 2020 and 2030, $24 billion to achieve our NDC 2. On this $24 billion, we are evaluating that we are actually on a trend of getting $7 billion. So not even a third of what we need is actually expected. So then we can say that money is a problem for us into achieving our NDC. How are we filling that gap? First, we are undergoing a lot of reforms, a lot of financial reforms to help private investors de-risking their investment. We are actually celebrating our first sustainable bond. We are also creating with the IMF and the World Bank the first lemur bond to finance biodiversity. We are doing many legal frameworks reforms on the carbon market to attract the private sector, because we can optimize the funding we get from the GCF, from the JEF, from the Adaptation Fund, from multilateral and bilateral supports. But what we are really far from optimizing is the private sector support. And I'm here to tell you that Madagascar is really willing to attract more private sector investment into the NDC. We are doing all the efforts, all the ambitious reforms, and we hope that you will be willing to work with us into achieving this NDC's target. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our friend from Iberdrola, please.
Thank you very much. We are an energy company. We are convinced that accelerating this energy transition will be good for nature, for climate, but also for biodiversity, but will also be good for the economy. We have the technologies. Thanks to the technological revolution we have seen in the last 10 years. And nowadays, with the current technologies, we can decarbonize 80% of the emissions of the economy. What we need are two things: objectives at the NDCs, but not only long-term objectives, but medium-term objectives. And the second thing, and the basic thing, are policies. We need policies that move the economy into this direction. And we need fiscal policies, we need industrial policies, economic policies, fair transition policies. But the message is that with these policies and working in alliances, working with industry, we can decarbonize the economy faster than expected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Axian, please.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Amélie Yanguifes. I'm from Axion Group. Axion is a Pan-African group. We are into energy, telecommunications, financial services, and nature positive. So we're born in Madagascar, and we operate in 17 countries of Africa. And I'd like to make like sort of three calls from the private sector in terms of, related to the discussion questions. Indeed, yes, we need, and I hear the colleague also from Iberdrola mentioning it, we really need policy frameworks and regulations. Here I see two issues. One thing that we need urgently to really mobilize financial capital deployment and unlocking finance, especially through carbon markets, is really policy frameworks around the Article 6. So that's one thing. And the second thing around the Article 6, also there's this possibility of revocation or amendment in terms of the way it's deployed. And for investment, we need a certain stability, we need predictability. So it's really important also around the Article 6 policy framework that revocation or amendment should only be under extreme circumstances like fraud or human rights abuses. The second thing is regarding governments. I heard the colleague also from NDC partnership and all of you mentioning the public-private partnership. That's what we're working a lot on. For also investing, in climate, we really need to see and to have investors coming to us, because actually we need the investors coming to us. It's really to also have a signal by the government on investment-friendly climate policies for clean and low-carbon technologies. For example, e-mobility. Uganda, Ethiopia have taken clear decisions, and then this stimulates the private sector to say, okay, let's go, let's invest. There's some security that we're going to be backed up by governments on this. The other aspect is really the role of UN system and donors who we really need to support us. And that's a key role that the United Nations Global Compact is playing, is really having private sector being able to discuss with governments and with the other stakeholders around climate. We need them also to support us to build our capacity to deliver on the NDCs, on the NAPs, and to create this space where we can all speak. Private sector is a very large and sometimes nebulous concept also. Who is private sector? How do you establish the links? Also, the UN Global Compact is really playing this role of closing up us to these forums, to United Nations. But we need also the United Nations systems in the countries to understand better this role of UNGC, so that we, as private sector, we don't run to go and see, for example, UNDP, then UNEP, then UNGC, but that we really find the space so that we can work together on these NDCs and the policy frameworks. One last thing, it would be, we are, as I mentioned, we're born in Madagascar. So, and we have here our Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development. We work very closely, but we work in 17 countries. In some countries, we are less established, or we're opening markets and we're starting. It's a lot of different policy frameworks, a lot of different actors and stakeholders. So a call for, could we have African-specific standards for reporting, for all sustainability matters, to monitor our emissions, instead of following, so-called global standards, but also standards coming from Europe, etc., that are not always adapted to our circumstances? That would be great to have one door to call at for all these issues at regional level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. UNGC South Africa, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Achieng Ojuang, and I just wanted to share a bit about what we are seeing in South Africa, and in terms of we have to engage on a just transition. And recently, South Africa has a government of national unity, and we've seen how that drives positive sentiments, even for investments. We have seen recently the energy space open up for renewables, so the policy frameworks becoming more enabling. But I wanted to talk about just one externality, if I may call it that, and in terms of risk ratings, perceptions, and what the bearing of that on the cost of capital and investments. And this is beyond South Africa. This is into the African region entirely. And we know that is about perception, but if it's going to affect the implementation on our NDCs, and we know that risk sometimes is actual, perception sometimes is not quite actual. So how do we deal turning around that? We do know that as African countries, we have to work to strengthen governance. We have to create better enabling environments. But how do we deal with risks that are not actual? And I think the one way is to enable or to avail data that is more positive, but data will enable us to deal with actual risks. So just maybe to engage around this as a big barrier for the implementation of the NDCs in South Africa and in the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder that there are some discussion questions you'll see on the screen in front of you. So these are intended to give you some things to think about, but please don't feel you have to be limited only to these discussion questions. We can let the conversation go where it goes. Tata Steel.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving us an opportunity. Steel companies worldwide are responsible for about 8% of the emission, and we are aware of it. And we must say that we are committed to reduce the emission as much as possible. So, because it is a hard to abate sector, the 2-3 things that we probably must do is to make sure that the approach or the target that we take are transparent. We must also make sure that we reduce the risk that the investors are actually going to put. And at the same time, we must also make sure that we collaborate without boundaries. The harmonization between local and the global policies are important here, because often that creates a problem, and we do not really know exactly which one to follow. Having said that, we talk about the investment and it is sometime available and sometime not. But the fact is, while we solve the problem of investment, we must also make sure that these investments are monetized in a manner, the decarbonization processes are also monetized in a manner so that it helps both the investor and the companies. So what happens here is when there is an effort made for decarbonization, the benefit and the cost must flow seamlessly from the producer to the customers. Because it's a hard to abate sector and because of the fact that the decarbonization measures which a steel company can take is often very costly, we must make sure the monetization of such efforts are in place. And we must also make sure that the benefit of this and the cost of this is actually spread over the value chain. I think that will resolve the problem to some extent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. A3 and Co, please.
Thank you. ACube and Co, we are from the cement sector, so we represent around 8% of the global emissions over the world, and I would say 10. We operate in 30 countries, so I would talk on from a cement perspective in Africa and Middle East, and we have been part of NDCs and we have been interested in NDCs since 2 years. We even have made a website to review all the NDCs of the world from a cement perspective. And I want to say that the top 10 producers of cement industry in the globe after India and China and US doesn't have the word cement in their NDC. So we were very happy last year when the NDC sectorial was announced that 3.0 will be sectorial, and some countries in Middle East and Africa started to have cement on their NDC currently, but still with a problem that if we want to push for the 1.5 degree, the only way is the SBTI trajectory for hard to abate or high emission industries, and this is not abide by most of the countries in their 3.0 version, at least the countries I know of so far. So the main problem with the NDC is the NDC itself. The way we produce the NDC or the climate plan need to have the top parts of the GDP of the country mentioned clearly in their sectorials, because it is the impact on GHG that is real. So for example, Egypt NDC or some other African NDCs where cement is the second GDP part, they don't have cement there. It might be in 3.0, but it's not yet. So how we define, so the creation approach, the sectorial expertise, when we define, as I will echo Action and Tata both said that the NDC need to tackle and to address actions in the sectors that are doable, investable, to make it more attractive for investment. Third, as I said, the SBTI, and what is mentioned, what is needed by private sector is, if I want to produce green product, I need a green market. So I need green procurement policies to be in place other than the carbon price. So regardless of a carbon tax or a carbon price tag, I need green procurement. So because if there is no incentive for green products, we will not produce green products. So this is a pull that is required by government to ensure that private sector produces green products. Finally, and I would say this is an anchor point, if you looked at the stock take last year, it was obvious that everybody is behind. If you attended all what we say during the 3 years before the stock take, no one was thinking that he is behind. But reality is we are behind. So monitoring and reporting in a structural manner with clear channels that private sector can tap in, government can tap in, numbers can be exchanged, is crucial to make these NDCs happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Inca Group, please.
Yes, thanks, Simon, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Simon from the Inca Group. So for you, that would probably be IKEA. We're the biggest IKEA franchisee selling affordable home furnishing around the world, which we're very passionate about. We're also passionate about climate. So as a business, we're committed to the Paris Agreement and 1.5 degrees. And this year we had new science-based targets validated by the SBTi across scopes 1, 2, and 3. We made a good start. So we've managed to reduce emissions by around 24% since our baseline, but we've still got a lot to do. And we're now really digging in deep into scope 1, 2, and 3 across the full value chain so we can meet those science-based goals. And we need short and long-term policies in line with 1.5. That will help us accelerate the transition in areas like the circular economy, sustainable transportation, food systems, reducing food waste, agriculture and forestry, all complex value chain topics that need a collaboration across private and public sector. And Sandra and Ruth, as you said, NDCs, or as Selwyn said, national climate plans are a start. But on top of the plans, we actually need the tools that will drive those investments faster and move a little bit from the what and the why more into the how, because we're very much in that point. And there's one really tangible example in renewable energy I just wanted to flag, where we have big commitments, both in terms of our investments, but also our own operations. And we've made some good progress, but there are still barriers. And Simon, you asked what would help us move faster. Some examples there would be rapidly scaling up renewable energy through targets as well as incentives, but at the same time phasing out fossil fuel and connected subsidies. We need big investments in grid infrastructure so that when we generate all that lovely green energy, we've got somewhere to put it. Strong energy efficiency regulation across sectors, because you want to really become energy efficient before you start investing. That's the first step. Generally, we need a simplifying of permitting processes for renewable energy projects, and infrastructure, which respect a just transition, local communities and environmental standards. But we need those to be simpler and quicker. And we also would love to see encouraging and incentivizing the renovation and retrofitting of commercial and residential buildings, which also links to the IKEA mission around home furnishing. So just some really tangible examples in renewable energy. We've also got examples in other areas like zero emission transport, for example. We want to move fast, but we can move faster together. So thank you.
Thank you. Government of Indonesia, please.
Thank you very much. I'm the Special Envoy for the Indonesian government for international trade and multilateral cooperation. Happy to be here to share our thoughts. I looked at your 3 questions, so I'll try to answer the 3 questions. I think the first important thing, if we're trying to address this financing of climate action and sustainable development, is for countries to really have a very clear country platform or strategy for growth, which is green, resilient, and inclusive. And from there, once you have a strategy, a clear strategy that is underpinned by the priority sectors that you want to address. And not, in my country, it's energy, food, land use, and agriculture, as well as green industrialization, for instance. And then you identify what are the policies and institutions that need to be changed, including I'll give you an example of energy transition to understand how we are thinking about this. Something like energy transition, which has, in my country, say, for instance, has the role of a dominant state-owned enterprise. How do you manage that in the energy transition? From there, you identify the priority sectors, then you identify what are the investments that I need to be able to reach my goal of growth, which is green, resilient, and inclusive. And then the financing comes, right? So you can't just say, okay, we need the financing. We need the 2 trillion financing gap to be scaled up and so on. Where does that money go, I think, is really the basic question. And second, the policies are complex. So how do you design the policies so that they're consistent and predictable and incentivize the investments that we need? We know that there's this big gap of financing that's needed. But the private sector says, GFANZ at least says, we have 130 trillions. And then the developing countries are saying, Well, we have all these projects that we want to design, and here is our priorities. Where's the money? And then the GFAS will say, where are the projects that are investable? So this is not meeting at the moment, and that's why we need to be very clear on the strategy, identifying the investments, and structuring the investments in a way that will drive the financing. We know it has to come from the private sector. So I'm representing Indonesia, but I'm also representing my stakeholder group here is the G20 Bali Global Blended Finance Alliance. The intention of this alliance is to set it up as an alliance as well as a platform and hopefully as an international organization to address the very issue that developing countries are facing, to get the private sector to be blended with all the other public money and concessional money and philanthropy money. The data shows that $1 of capital, concessional capital that we see today is only crowding in less than $1 of private capital. So there's this, it's not meeting, here's the money, no project. Here's the projects and the money are not going there. So how do we address this? We have to address the risks and issues faced by developing countries, which is lack of policy framework, higher risks because of not being investment grade, exchange rate risk, political risk, policy risk, and finally the capacity, the human capital, and the ability to structure these projects so that they become investable. And this is where we would like to be able to address the risks and the capacity building needed and the training of countries, and to come up with real showcase examples of where blended finance, which is really about different sources of capital with different risk and return appetite, to be combined to address different projects that have different returns and risks in there. So if in energy, coal face down is not going to give you return. Who's going to finance that? Renewable energy will give you what you need. So how do you get that to be combined? And the big issue for developing countries is transition finance. And the banks and the financial sector have not actually recognized how to give transition finance. So we also have to address the green financial architecture as well. So this is just some of our thoughts, but we envision our role as to helping developing countries address these risks, come up with showcase examples, have the partnerships and with all the stakeholders to be able to realize the ability for the financing to be meeting with the projects that are needed in the developing countries, both for climate action as well as for SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you. UN Environment, please.
Thank you. My colleague who spoke earlier, Ruth Kutu, had to step away and asked me to step in. I'm at UN Environment Finance Initiative, more specifically, and we're the part of UN Environment that works also with a big part of the private sector, namely the private financial services industry. So we work with throughout developed and developing countries with commercial banks, commercial insurance, institutional investors, etc. First of all, I wanted to congratulate the leadership of those companies, those parts of the private sector that are in caring for climate, for their science-based target setting, for their transition planning, and for all the good things that all of you are doing on decarbonization. We work with the financial services industry in a very similar way. We've mobilized hundreds of commercial banks, hundreds of institutional investors and insurance companies to also set for their portfolios decarbonization targets in line with 1.5. So we do have a lot of leadership in the private sector at this point, but that leadership alone is not going to deliver Paris. And this is why it's unsurprising that kind of the policy term comes up time and again. We need to now find a way to use this private sector leadership that exists in caring for climate, in GFANs, in our net zero alliances, and to make that proof of concept and put that in front of governments, of policymakers, of some of the some of the governments here around the table, and say we need this leadership to become the new normal. Now the issue with that is that policy formulation at country level is there are forces, including from the private sector, that don't want net zero action. There are forces within the private sector that want it, and there are forces within the private sector that do not want it. And we need to among the leading parts of the private sector, including the finance sector, I think we need to win this battle for policy formulation in countries that will be conducive. And so we need to think, I think, of these grand coalitions of the willing from the real economy, from the financial services industry, who get together and who make sure that as they're engaging with their national governments, they can win this battle, against those other forces that are, really standing in the way of the progress that we need. Thank you.
Thank you. PepsiCo, please.
Thanks, Simon. Many of you know PepsiCo for our beverages. We're actually a much larger food company, and we're active in 200 countries and territories around the world. So if it happens, we see it somewhere. A lot of great points have been made, and I want to make sort of 3 points that maybe cut across the discussion questions based on our concern very briefly. We've heard a lot about policy. Completely agree. I think as a goal of whatever policy, and we've heard lots of different ones, a explicit goal should be global harmonization. And it's really around 3 things: the criteria, the principles, and the requirements. Because if we have a patchwork, if we have fragmentation, any private sector company will tell you we're then talking about it's not scalable, it's slower, it's more complex, it's going to cost more. So global harmonization as an explicit goal around whatever the policy is. The second is around risk and reward, or risk and return. The point there is there's a ratio, and the ratio varies depending on a whole lot of things, but there's always a ratio. And governments can play, a lot of time and attention gets spent on the return piece. I want to talk about the risk piece, because that's, I would argue, in many cases, governments have the biggest impact on risk, whether it's policy or using whatever money they have to de-risk or to just providing clarity and consistency. But the risk reward is always a ratio, and getting that ratio right is probably the single biggest lever. And then finally, everything at the end of the day gets anchored. If it's most effective, I would argue it gets anchored in a commercial relationship. Somewhere, somebody is paying something or buying something. In our case, we're buying low carbon or climate smart agricultural commodities, or we're buying recycled content, or we're buying, any number of other things, renewable electricity. But if it's anchored in a commercial contract, then it provides income, which obviously helps, and it also provides a level of stability that is often missing. All of these things, I think, are enabled by conversations like this, right? Making sure that private sector has a seat at the table. It's a seat that has to be earned, and often trust is a problem. And I think, the companies around the table will acknowledge that. Trust is something that has to be earned, but it also, if that trust is earned, it should be a real seat at the table. It should be, at the adults' table, and it should be from the very beginning. So some thoughts that I think cut across these questions and cut across a number of the comments that have been made to really help the private sector financing the money become unleashed and part of helping to solve for the NDCs. Thank you.
Thank you. Mahindra Group, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Ankit Odi representing the Mahindra Group from India, a long-time supporter of both UNCC and private sector action for climate. One of the things that the private sector is particularly good at is having clear targets, quantifiable targets, and doing annual performance reviews. So when it comes to NDCs, I think one of the things that we really need to push for is how can we get each country to have better, clear annual targets, numerical, measurable, and do a better job at the stock take. The second thing that I wanted to cover was particularly the climate transition is a lot about the energy transition that we have been hearing so far. How can we get each country to have 3 metrics to track? One is on renewable energy, the second on energy efficiency, and the third on electrification in particular. Specifically, when we talk about renewable energy, a lot of the global conversation currently is still about the amount of installed capacity. Unfortunately, installed capacity for renewable energy is not comparable to installed capacity for fossil fuels. How do we change this narrative to move from installed capacity to generation? So both percentage generation of renewable electricity that each country has year on year, but at the same time, percentage use of renewable energy. So making the distinction between electricity and energy and making sure that we look at generation and uses rather than just capacity, that can really help change the narrative and the pace at which different countries are moving around the world. And absolutely supportive of all the points that have been said so far in this regard. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Government of Malaysia, please.
Thank you. I just want to answer the question 3 first, Simon. I think so we are committed to achieving the NDC's target that we have set in 2.0. NDC 3.0 is up for revisions in February and next year. And I think to achieve that goal, I think we have introduced several policy framework that would incentivize investment to this sector. Let me just share 1 or 2 policy that might be of interest today. The National Energy Transformation Roadmap that would encourage the RE take-up up to 70% by 2050. And as mentioned by my colleague from Inca Group, we need to strengthen the grid infrastructure. We need to invest a lot on battery storage technology. That would need a lot of investment to come into the sector. Second policy that we have put in place is that the climate change bill, basically for us to optimize these Article 6.2 and 6.4. Again, I would see that we would like to encourage you to come in and talk to us how we could work together to realize these streams 6.2 and 6.4. And on the hard to abate sector, some colleagues pointed out, energy, steel, and cement industry. As you might be following up on what we have been going in the countries that 2026, we have to start introducing the carbon tax mechanism. We have not gotten any rate yet, I would say, but we're looking towards that just to make sure that this hard to abate industry play their role as well. And this, in the long term, will help government to achieve net zero by 2050. That's our commitment. And all these things will need a lot of investment. Storage, technology, grid strengthening, projects that are bankable. Whether it's project on nature-based solution, tech-based solution, and we are willing to just talk. And then perhaps if you have time, please drop our pavilion. We can have more discussion on this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Arab Group, please.
Thank you. And thank you for convening a meeting that brings together the voices of government and business together. Arab Group are engineering, planning, design consultancy. We delivered projects in 120 countries last year. And excuse me, I wanted to home in on the commitments made last COP on doubling energy efficiency. The conversation always is going to tripling renewables, but we need to put as much emphasis into doubling energy efficiency. If I look at the requirements for buildings to double energy efficiency, one of the battles is competing with energy for reductions due to electric vehicles in cities. It's competing with data centers. So we have to, if we're going to get to where we need to get to, we need to be actually really looking at a more granular level. So moving the conversation from just the quantum of finance that needs to be mobilized to being very specific about what sectors need to be mobilized in, it needs to be mobilized in and where, and fully support the special envoy from Indonesia in terms of the approach that she's taking. I thought it also might be worth highlighting sort of where we are now. At the moment, 168 out of 194 countries actually mention buildings and construction sector in their NDCs. But a recent report by the Programme for Energy Efficiency of Buildings, which dug into what did that really look like, noted that only 50% of them actually were considering adaptation. Now, buildings are essential, as is transport systems, energy systems, water systems, for resilience of communities and cities, as well as to reach net zero targets. And those are the sectors that we really need to be homing in on at a much more granular level. In those NDCs, there were only 16% of them outlined in funding and financing for mitigation, and only 3% for adaptation. That's just to give a scale of the gap that we're trying to solve. However, in the buildings industry, I think is a good example of where significant progress has been made. We as a firm have really lent into collaborations, whether that's the Climate Champions, the World Economic Forum, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, to actually form collaboration within the industry. But the next step is then collaboration between industry and government in a much more structured way. The Buildings Breakthrough at COP28 convened a collective of governments, which then led to the Paris Forum in March, which then led to the Shio Declaration, which has given business a signal of what governments collectively feel is important. On the other side of the coin, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development has convened businesses and companies together with the global ABC, the global, the Green Building Councils, to actually define a market transformation agenda for the industry, identifying the things that we absolutely all need to do and get that harmonization, which is so important. And that agenda includes aligning on whole life carbon. So we can find the money, we've actually then got to count the carbon, and we've got to account for it in a harmonized way. RICS has stepped into that and is really doing good work on that. So the carbon accounting has to be standardized, as well as the policies. We need to get carbon pricing on the agenda and in a consistent way across the world and across the industry. And that is, as well as policy by government, that is another one that is significant. And some countries have taken the lead on that. We'd like to see more of that in NDCs. We also need to have much faster adoption of the importance of transition risk assessments and valuing the costs of inaction, because at the moment, the equation is all balanced in one direction. And then the other big gap is the implementation gap, recognizing that if the money is there, the projects have to be there, but once the projects are there, they have to be implemented. And that then brings up a whole lot of other delay factors in terms of procurement, in terms of permitting, in terms of policy. So I think we have to put a time line on this. I think 1.5 degrees is still alive, but only if we take a managed approach to it, rather than saying we can achieve 9% a year between now and 2030. We've got to build in the lead-in times for implementation, as well as for mobilizing the finance.
Thank you. Government of South Africa, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for convening this. And I think a lot has been said in terms of the role that the private sector can play in the NDC. But just to say for us coming into the COP, it presents a critical opportunity to call for adequate, predictable, at a scale financial as well as technology transfer and development to support the implementation of ambitious climate action in our nationally determined contribution, including enhancing the adaptive capacity and building resilience to the devastating impacts of climate change. We need to prioritize both the rise to development and the development space required to pursue climate goals without compromising economic and social progress in developing countries. A central element to achieving this is through the new collective quantifiable goal on climate finance. This collective goal must be both larger and more comprehensive than current financial flow, responding in an outcome-based manner, wherein the financial needs for developing countries to implement their nationally determined contribution, and as well as their national adaptation plans, which must be taken into consideration when we talk about the nationally determined contribution, as well as our just transition pathways to ensure that it's met. Effective implementation of these NDCs requires active participation of all sectors, with the private sector playing a pivotal role in scaling up climate action. And I think this is something that has already been said in the room. We believe the private sector brings an essential capacity such as innovative technologies, investment capital, and specialized expertise, which are necessary for achieving NDC targets. Business can leverage climate actions as an opportunity to access new markets, develop sustainable products, and demonstrate leadership in corporate responsibility. For South Africa, there's a recognition of the importance of enhancing the NDC ambition in a responsible manner. This can be achieved by implementing the agreed national emission trajectory within the range specified in the NDC while refining the just transition pathways. These must be supported by clear financial flows and strategies that address socioeconomic challenges. At the same time, increasing NDC ambition must be done thoughtfully, considering national circumstances, national climate risk, including energy security and economic stability. Moreover, we believe NDC should highlight technology and capacity gaps, presenting opportunity for private sector involvement in technology transfer innovation. Key gaps include technical capacity and financial flow to undertake project preparation and de-risk innovative solution. Additionally, clear monitoring and tracking progress of commitment against the Paris Agreement as compared to the current baseline will help demonstrate the progress made through mitigation action. We believe achieving NDC targets require collective efforts, with government taking the leadership and the private sector dynamism intersecting. This collaboration will ensure that climate goals translate into actionable results, benefiting society, the economy, and the environment, leaving no one behind. I thank you.
Thank you. UNGC Nigeria, please.
Thank you. So I find the number 2 very interesting, and I really wanted to speak to a legal perspective, given I'm a lawyer from Nigeria and the United States. So I want to bring specifically the importance of legal transplant to this discourse. So as we know, legal transplant is the process of really introducing laws from different jurisdictions and transferring them to another with the aim of addressing similar challenges or needs. So in the context of managing climate policies in various regions while maintaining consistency, legal transplant can really help countries align their climate policies by adopting international standards and best practices from other regions that have successfully addressed similar challenges. So looking at, for example, the EU emissions trading systems, that has been a successful model for carbon pricing. Other countries, particularly in regions like Asia or Latin America, could adopt aspects of the EU's model and tailor them to their own context to create more consistent and harmonized carbon pricing mechanisms across different countries, and to make it easier for global markets to function. And then if you look at the Africa perspective, legal transplant also presents opportunity for countries to learn from the successes and failures of others. For example, countries in the global south could look to the Green Climate Fund or clean development mechanism that has been established by the UNFCCC for lessons on how to mobilize climate finance, implement carbon offset programs, or incentivize green technologies. So in the face of a global crisis like climate change, legal transplant can foster global learning, help implement best practice solutions, and ensure that countries, regardless of their level of development, are able to meet the climate challenge with coherent and robust existing legal frameworks that can be localized and adopted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. NAS Technology Inc., please.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you so much. My name is Yubo Zhai. I come from NAS Technology. Actually, we are the leading EV charging service provider and companies in China. So we offer the services not only in China and also globally. We right now work with almost 10,000 partners, so manage this Scope 2 emission together with them. So first, I think I want to say thanks to the UN Global Compact gave the private sector this great opportunity to share our perspectives, because we think here right now there are not enough opportunities for enterprises to participate in the climate policy discussions. Because enterprise, we cannot only implement a regulatory requirements, but also be more involved and provide more direct feedback on the green financing, standards or some different sustainability guidelines or disclosure standards. So I think right now, future private sectors can take a more important role. And also, I think I heard a lot of the feedbacks and opinions from the local government. So actually, I want to focus on the second questions and share some key or detailed suggestions from the private sectors. The first one is about is it possible for private sectors we can get the mutual recognition of the green certification labels, because we know that for lots of the different the private sector companies, for example, the green building materials, the certification by different countries, is this possible also can be recognized by other countries, because this help reduce the certification costs and complexity for enterprises with selling the green products in different national markets and encourage the enterprise to invest in products and technologies to meet the green standards. And the second one is today we talked about the green financial issues. So we also from the private sectors, we think, is this possible we can unify the green financial standards or incentive, the policies? I know it's very difficult. Even for one country, we have this different international or the financing standards. I give one example, like in China, we developed EV charging basic infrastructures. We worked with a multilateral bank, with a local commercial bank, plus private sectors. This business model worked very well in China. But when we want to work like this kind of business model to some other countries, we still meet some difficulties. It is possible to have more, do not give more obstacles to private sectors, but we can leverage all these resources to help private sectors to work together to achieve this NDC, because this is one ambition target for the countries. But how we can change from slogans to actions, for sure, the contribution from the private sectors is very, very important. So the last point I want to share is that is it possible we can establish one cross-border climate policy information platform? It's very important to identify the climate risks for different private sectors when we go into the different countries. Like right now in China, we also worked with different non-profit organizations. For this platform from the private sectors, we can share different data. We work with different NGOs. So then for different other international companies, they want to go into this market, we can use this platform to identify the different climate risks. But actually, we still need more contribution on this global platform to work with the UN and different utilities or the different organizations. So thank you.
Thank you. SolarVest Holdings, please.
Thank you. Solar is a Malaysia solar project developer. We are into clean energy development now. We are focusing in 7 countries in Southeast Asia. We have developed 1.2 gigawatt in the past, and we have 6.5 gigawatt in the pipelines in 7 countries that we are operating in, mainly 6 countries in Southeast Asia. I think I'll share to you some of the realistic challenges that while we're developing projects in clean energy project in Southeast Asia. One of it is energy market liberalizations. We hope to see that more and more energy market in Southeast Asia to go into liberalized, to have more wholesale market, and to have more pricing transparency, because we do see that the less pricing mechanism transparency in the clean energy project, the higher risk that institutional financing institution will see this, and it will cost higher financing costs, and it will actually cost the project not feasible. And also any form of energy trading market, P2P energy trading, energy exchange, example like Energen from Malaysia that we are going to introduce, that we're going to have more and more clearer framework, that I think this will help the clean energy market to expand, to grow faster. And following up to that, APG, ASEAN Power Grid project, is really a different level of clean energy market that we could develop. And we do hope that policymakers, governments, G2G negotiations can actually go into more faster and to create more standard framework for cross-border electricity sales, that to materialize ASEAN power grid and to build ASEAN clean energy market as one of the biggest green economy in the global. So this is one of the first point that we want to bring up. And accessibility to green financing, multilateral financing for Southeast Asian project is one of the bottleneck that we've seen. Green bond standard, how do we have more green bond offer into clean energy projects in Southeast Asia? Green loans and other sort of financing incentive that to grow more projects, clean energy project in Southeast Asia. As we exploring in 6 countries in Southeast Asia, we do see that this is a growing market. There are a lot of FDI demands on decarbonizing their economy and their industry as well. And the project complexity is increasing. Interconnections is increasing, land cost increasing, and the capex. While project developer like us, we try to saturate the capex of the projects, so cost of financing become one of the differentiator whether the project is feasible or not feasible. The last point that I want to bring up is carbon pricing that I think I brought up previously as well, especially and also cross-border REX framework. And this is very important if we want to materialize ASEAN power grid. We want to materialize cross-border electricity sales between Malaysia and Singapore or between Southeast Asia country. This is a framework. This is a standard framework between cross-border that we need to establish as soon as possible to make it happen. That's all the points that I have. Thank you.
Thank you. JSC Development Bank of Kazakhstan, please.
Good day. My name is Dina Janadzil. I'm from the Development Bank of Kazakhstan. It's a leading financial institution. We usually finance medium and large-scale projects. And it's a great honor here to be participate as a member of UN Global Compact. And here I would like to just outline several arguments and points. First one is like it's essential to harmonize standards, and second one is essential also to have unified maybe taxonomy, because in our practice we issued green and sustainable bonds, and also we get our first like ESG rating, and sometimes we note that, for example, China, EU, Hong Kong, or maybe they have own taxonomies. In Kazakhstan, we have own taxonomy, so that different various ESG criteria for borrowers, and sometimes you don't have like unified definition determination for green projects or even sustainable projects. Every country can classify or identify its by themselves. So therefore, it can lead some for misunderstanding from investor sides. And also the second one is like in terms of the harmonization of standards, we usually report our annual report in line with GRI, SASB standards. Also this year we disclosed some IFRS S1 and S2 disclosures. So there are many climate related disclosures. And here I would like to have like some unified also maybe climate related one standard disclosures, because for example, as a former Big Four alumni, I have like, for example, for the financial statements, you have clear like IFRS or maybe GAAP standards. And here, if you have like unified climate related disclosures, it also help to be for the transparency and the disclosure for the investors as well. So, and the third one is like in terms of the capacity building, I think it's essential. Also, I would like to thank UN Global Compact for the many accelerators we are participating in these events. And the fourth one, I think that it's just my view. I would like to have some big pipeline of projects, and then to identify the carbon intensive sectors, then to identify key players in these carbon intensive sectors by countries, then by companies, organizations, and then to identify what kind of source of financing you need for that one. Because, for example, our borders would like to get local currency, but in order to provide some concessional financing, you should, first of all, we use public, both private finance, but now we started to work with the GCF and other funds to attract climate funds to use it for blended financing as well. So I think that this discussion was very also informative and helpful for me as well, because this collaboration, I think that will lead us for the unified climate standards. Thank you.
Thank you. Sunwater Electronic, please.
Thank you. Thank UNCC arranged this occasion and invite me to participate in this very important meeting. Sunwanda is a leading lithium-ion battery manufacturer in the world. We're the #1 mobile phone battery provider in the world, accounting for 30% of the market share. And also in the recent years, we have enjoyed a very good opportunity to develop our power battery and energy storage system business. I think the policy from the Chinese government and the general trend of sustainability has given us really a macro environment to develop all kind of technology and solutions. From our feeling and our experience, we think the investment for the climate neutrality is really a hopeful business in the future. For example, electric vehicle industry in China has recently received a very rapid growth in the past years, and from a rough estimation, the government invested almost 200 billion RMB, but as a matter of fact, the private sector and the financial investment has invested more than 1 trillion RMB. That is a very good pudding for the private financial institutions to follow the government policy. So we think we have a very good experience and examples to share. In my feeling, we think the government has made a very firm decision to achieve the carbon peak in 2030 and carbon neutrality in 2060. That goal has become the common goal for the whole country. And also government has delivered all kind of comprehensive policies to set up a scheme for all the related stakeholders to participate in this common this kind of a very grand task. Next, we think we have put a lot of investment and incentive policy to develop a key technology and develop all very crucial solutions to support the carbon reduction solutions. And also the government has paid much attention for infrastructure construction. For example, we have invested more than, we have constructed more than 104 million charging ports and stations. We have already facilitated the people to charge their electric vehicles anywhere in the country. And I think in the future, with the fast charge technology has emerged, there are more and more fast charger stations will be put into operation. So we think the comprehensive policy from the government and also the voluntary involvement of the financial sectors is a very good incentive mechanism to support we achieve the climate neutrality goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Bank Letterhead, please.
It's getting desperate. So I put it down. Thank you. Actually, we are a private sector bank that operates in Jordan and now in Iraq, and we're in the Middle East. We've been a bank that has aligned its strategies with the development strategies and goals of the country. So we own the sustainability market, the women market, we support youth, entrepreneurship, and SMEs. So we have been very much plugged, and we're in general, the private sector in Jordan is active and works closely with government. Having said that, for us to really move the needle and achieve what we need to achieve, we need the government also to be able to do the investments that they need to do. And in our case, the government is really challenged on a lot of stress and limited resources. So if you look at our indices, a big percent of them are actually non-voluntary and dependent on support that comes from the international community and the IFIs and so on. So we need that to really come in timely for us to be able to take the country forward. And, we deal with a lot of complexities. We're probably the second poorest country in the world when it comes to water. We do have issues of climate stress and heat and food security. So it is really for us very important, and it is a matter of survival. And we have to deal with a lot of nexuses, be it water energy, be it influx of refugees versus resources and environment and so on. And on the complexities, I would also add an angle that hasn't been mentioned, is that we work for years to move the needle forward and to improve what we do towards achieving our NDCs and the climate goals and so on. And then wars in our neighborhood take us back for 100 years in days and weeks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for a really, really excellent discussion. I think as we've heard throughout this conversation, there's a need for dramatic acceleration of action on this front, but all of us have an opportunity in our different ways to play a really constructive role in that, and I hope it's an opportunity that we don't waste. So thank you for all those really great insights and ideas, and I hope we've all taken away some things that we can think about further and perhaps put into practice. So we're going to finish now with a short fireside chat between Tololope Tamoka, who's the Chief of Government Relations and Africa for the UNGC, and Helmi Abuleish, who's the CEO of SECEM. Over to you both. Thank you.
So much, Simon. So I'm here as the Secretariat for the Africa Business Leaders Coalition, and I'll kick off by saying a bit about the coalition and then have a conversation with Helmi, one of the CEOs of our coalition. The Africa Business Leaders Coalition was established in 2022 with the intention of amplifying the collective voice of Africa's private sector on a global scale. The ABLC sees the private sector as a key mechanism for bold action in coordination with supportive policy, regulations, and infrastructure from the private sector, as well as from the public sector, a discussion we're having today. The actions of the coalition directly aligns with our discussions this afternoon. With our 70 and growing members across Africa, leading initiatives that reduce emissions, increase renewable energy adoption, and build community resilience, while all working guided by our policy blueprint to channel $130 trillion of capital to Africa's sustainable future. We encourage you all to take a look at the progress the coalition has made in such a short time, which is showcased in its 2024 voluntary climate report, which we are also launching here at COP29. But to show you how the ABLC works in practice, I'd like to introduce you to the CEO of one of our members, SECEM, Mr. Helmi Abuleish.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I will introduce myself. I'm Helmi Abuleish from Egypt, a farmer from Egypt, and a very proud member of the African Business Leaders Coalition since its inception in 2022, and hence happy to share with you what we are doing in our project along these efforts. And we are coming from a sector which was not on the table yet. It's the agriculture and food system sector, which we are
pioneers in since 1977 as the first organic biodynamic farm and company in Egypt, and then later on in the region. And yeah, we are coming out of a sector which is responsible for 30% of the problem, agriculture and food. We spoke about everything else, which is also responsible, but agriculture and food is a big part of the problem. And so only recently, after 47 years of working successfully in organic and biodynamic farming in Egypt and being in every household today, having thousands of farmers, thousands of people working, we just started to try to understand what is our impact on climate in the organic biodynamic movement. And we did this through a prototype project called Greening the Desert. We started it in 2019, and it's basically setting up a farm in the desert using organic biodynamic methods and planting 1 million trees to have agroforestry and so on, and then to see what's going on with soil, trees, footprints, ecosystem services in large, on biodiversity, on water, or on carbon. And of course, the result was overwhelming. We have 10 tons per acre in this specific farm. And this is obviously, at any price of a monetary carbon market, a big story for a farmer, even if it's a smallholder farmer in Egypt, not a big farm like ours. And so we are now upscaling this to 40,000 farmers in Egypt with the aim of reaching out to the 7 million over the next 5 to 10 years, because it's just a wonderful story. Huh? You tell a farmer, do the right farming, and it's organic and biodynamic. Don't use all these pesticides and chemicals, which is cheaper. Maybe you have less production, but you get an additional payment in ecosystem services, in this case for carbon credits, which enables you to sell at the conventional price an organic product, having better food in the market at the same price, because nobody can afford a higher price in Egypt or in Africa or anywhere else. And at the same time, you do something against climate, you mitigate climate, and you have better incomes and you have better food. So with this concept, we are really aiming to upscale organic and biodynamic farming in the next 10 years to 250,000 farmers, which would be 20% of Egypt's total area. And then it gets relevant for system change. But we believe that this is a model which can be used all over the world, in particular in Africa. So we are working now with Tanzania, Kenya, Tunisia, Morocco, and Nigeria. And we are starting in Brazil and India, because the same kind of honoring farmers for their ecosystem services, just honoring them for this, is working everywhere, is needed everywhere. And there is no race to zero in the world without our natural-based solutions, without agriculture, without soils, trees, and oceans. Because in every industry you're in, whether it's cement or steel, you can never come to zero. Not even the food system, not in my food industry, I cannot come to zero without balancing it out with some sequestration. So I think there's a huge potential in this sector, a huge opportunity, and we are happy to share, and to do this in the framework of the African Business Leaders Coalition is a big honor for us.
Thank you so much. Such innovative work. So you mentioned 47 years of learning and doing and action. Can you tell us, in your experience, what supporting policy frameworks and regulations could further help de-risk investments?
I mean, in our industry, let's say, if organic agriculture is an industry and organic food systems, the issue on the table is it's more expensive, hence it's all over the world 2%. Nobody is discussing whether it's better, nicer, better for the environment, healthier, and so on. Nobody. But it's not taking off, and not in Germany, and not in Africa, and not in the US, and nowhere. It's 6% at the best. So how can this Maya that organic and biodynamic products are more expensive because they are not on any true cost accounting of FAO or anyone else? We are cheaper already, but not on the shelf. Huh? That's the problem. So we look more expensive and consumers buy the cheaper stuff. So this is the story. And I think with ecosystem service payments, we can at least for a time, until consumers pay the right price, gap this situation by just give this ecosystem services an additional income. And this needs frameworks. This needs a lot of frameworks, because in agriculture in particular, criteria, what's the standard, is it permanent, where's the registry? How much goes to the farmer? How can we make sure that whenever we have ecosystem services, 80% goes to the farmer, not 10 or 15, and so on. There is a lot of things which needs support from regulation, international, national government. We are happy our government was very, very supportive because it could smell the opportunity for its farmers, but this needs to be still replicated. And in the end, it needs a bigger market. In the end, it needs private sector and everyone to come in to really also honor the price and the added value of such agricultural carbon credit, whole system agricultural carbon credit, which in comparison to maybe some other carbon credits, if we call it a commodity, would be much more expensive because it has many, many added values, biodiversity, water, social livelihoods, and so on. How can you price this and compare it to whatever renewable energy carbon credit? So there needs to be some common work done, but I think if it's there, then it's an opportunity for the whole world to really help millions of farmers improve the quality of our food, reduce the hidden costs of agriculture on the food system, and mitigate climate change.
Thank you so much, Helmi. Thank you for sharing the impact that your work with farmers is having, also as a member of our esteemed coalition and on behalf of your organization and the group of farmers you work with. As a Pan-African coalition, we have worked hard as the ABLC to bridge the challenges and gaps across different markets, bringing together the public and the private sectors along with the United Nations system to affect change, with the ABLC being proof that the African private sector is stepping up to lead the way on climate action. And I'm sitting right next to two of them, Axiom Group and SICM. In just 2 short years, the surveyed ABLC members have already mobilized $4.8 billion of climate financing as a group. They've achieved a 28% renewable energy share as a collective and built powerful momentum across resilience and adaptation, as we have heard today. They can't do it alone. We can't do it alone. Ongoing engagements in forums like this and in scaling up such initiatives can truly make impact. And we look forward to working with you all on this journey. Thank you. I pass it back to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Tolulope and Helmi, for a really interesting conversation there. And thank you all for your contributions to what I hope you agree has been a really stimulating and thought-provoking session. Lots of food for thought there for me, and I hope for all of us. So thank you very much for taking part. And I'll now just hand over back to you, Sander, for some short closing remarks. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon, for moderating us through what has really been a stimulating discussion. You know, who do we have in the room? We have about 8 governments represented here, or 8 governments represented. We have about 65 representatives from the private sector, but we're representing 28 countries, very different perspectives, different views, different regulations, working under different, conditions for business. But surprisingly, I think we've all come together on a couple of key points. When we thought about this discussion, we wanted to be able to answer the question, how to close the gap. We've talked about the national climate plans, or NDCs, as we had spoken about earlier. We've talked about investment roadmaps. But what I hear from everybody collectively, both from the public sector and private, is there is a gap. What is most interesting, and we've said this for a couple of years, never before have we been so forearmed. We know what exists. We know technologies. We have solutions. We've heard that there's financing available. Perhaps it's not getting best to where it needs to go to, but also forewarned because all of us have seen what the business risks are, what the political risks are, and certainly what the other economic and social risks are, and the costs of climate inaction, as one of the speakers said. So what do we need to do? And what do we as the Global Compact want to commit to do with yourselves? One is to see how we can close that gap. Part of that gap is bringing private sector in close discussion and dialogue with government. It doesn't happen enough. And we're committed to truly working through our country networks and with our business coalitions and through the UN system to be able to do more. We've heard that there's a clear need for more enabling policies. A3 and Co, for example, mentioned that carbon markets, even though not fully monetized yet, are not adequate. And we need more going beyond into green procurement policies.
Iberdrola and Inca Group, for example, also mentioned a great private sector willingness. And we hear that all the time, willingness to increase the quantity of renewables. Incidentally, I was up on your roof in Sydney the other day, the Inca Group, IKEA, and looked at how much generation the company was providing for its own operations. So great willingness, action, but obviously permitting is taking a long time, grid infrastructure is limited, and really some natural barriers towards expanding that willingness to do more around renewables. The Indonesian government mentioned, for example, a mass disconnect between financing and availability of projects. Both exist, actually, but they can't find each other. These are just some of the examples of where we truly need to be able to close that gap. What have we also heard? That governments must work to help de-risk investments and create an enabling environment for infrastructure, for financing and for investments. We've heard businesses asking for more of a seat at the table, but also the trust needs to be built across that table. We want to see policies with predictability and stability. We've also held challenges around country risk perceptions that seem to limit the amount of investment finance that goes towards certain economies. So in all of this, I think our overall conclusion and how we can best work collectively to close that gap and certainly contribute to this vibrant discussion that we're having in the context of climate conferences is truly see how we can continue to mobilize, as I said, private and public sectors to come together, identifying what those gaps are and really seeing how we can work collectively to solve for them. Earlier this year, last year, the Secretary General tasked us as the UN Global Compact to do some research to identify what were some of these barriers towards enabling policy environments and a more robust investment infrastructure. The report, and we call it Policy Enablers for the SDGs, is available online. You can take a look at it. We surveyed 5 countries, Brazil, India, South Africa, Egypt, and I always forget the 5th one at my own risk. But, really deep research in there. But again, all calling for the need. Angola was the 5th one. All calling for the need for us to sit better together, work collectively, and indeed, just to close, to reflect on the spirit of the Sustainable Development Goals, because when they were designed in 2015, private sector was at the table, along with governments and the United Nations and civil society. So my call here is for us to continue those dialogues across the 28 countries from which we come, across the various sectors, and with government, because only with this collaborative spirit will we truly be able to close that gap. Thank you so much for your time, for your attendance, for your commitment to the work of the UN Global Compact. Ours to ensure you that we stand ready to support you in as many ways as possible to close that gap. Thank you so very much.